Welcome back. An Adelaide mum, who can't be named to protect the identity of her young son, has spoken about her disappointment in the South Australian Police after her child was groomed by a sexual predator through his Instagram account. These are her own words. It started when the scooter craze hit all kids living in Adelaide. Every skate park in every suburb was full of young teens, small kids, even toddlers. They would film the tricks they had learned, posting them on Instagram, hashtagging their favourite riders from around Australia. The craze was huge. I was hesitant to make an Instagram page for my sons. I'd done a cyber safety course through my work a few months earlier, so I understood the dangers and how to be smart. I linked all accounts to mine. So if they got a friend request, a private message, a new comment, all notifications came directly to me first. I thought I was doing a good thing, teaching my kids the appropriate ways to interact on social media regarding kindness, cyberbullying and safety. Because let's face it, kids can be horrible and social media is not going anywhere in the near future. So my thinking was I could mould them while I still had control. Things were fine for the first few months. It was all school friends and family. Then out of the blue, one evening, my son got a private message from an account I did not know. It was harmless at first, then it turned bad real quick. My son came to me and said, "This conversation is a bit weird." So I took his device and continued with the conversation. It went from my son asking, "Do you scoot?" to "Do you have a girlfriend? Does she let you do things to her?" Then talking about masturbation and other sick things. This man was no longer speaking to my son at this point, he was speaking to me. The account holder said he was 12 years old and he was using his uncle's account. The picture was of a man in his 30s. My heart was racing. Quick thinking, I started to screenshot the conversation, because the way Instagram works is you can delete a message and it will delete it from both sides of the thread. And if he blocks me, I can't see his account either. It bothered me deeply because the man's account was called Nick, football coach, and his page was full of kids my son's age. I asked this person, "If you're really 12, send me a picture of who I'm talking to." Within seconds, his messages were disappearing before my eyes, so it now looked as though I was talking to myself. Then he blocked our account. If I had not screenshot the conversation and his profile, this creep would have gotten away with it and moved on to the next child. I was not having that. A simple Google search of his name, Nick, football coach, led me to this man's Facebook account and business page. It said he lived in Perth. It was the same picture he had on Instagram, so I knew it was him. I messaged him and he blocked me. I took the information I had to my local police station at the end of Jetty Road in Glenelg. The man behind the counter looked at me blankly and said, "What do you want us to do?" He said, "Good luck," as I walked out the door. So I rang Sturt Police. No luck there either. I rang AFP, the Australian Federal Police, in the city and was told someone would call me back. They didn't. Feeling as though I was getting nowhere, I decided to post it all on my Facebook page. My cousin lives overseas in Scotland and noticed the soccer team Nick had on his page. The man did not live in Perth, Australia. He was from Perth, Scotland. She told me to email her the screenshots. Within 2 hours of sending them to her, she had 2 constables sitting in her flat taking it all down. They took the matter very seriously. Within the day, Nick was asked to hand over his iPad, phone and computer. He thought he would be smart and factory reset everything clear. It didn't work. His name was Nicholas Henderson. He was 28 years old. He was a soccer coach for an underage team at a club called Scone Thistle. He also arranged overnight trips to football games and had a birthday party service for kids' parties. I informed the football club's president. He was hesitant, but Nick had already started to tell people it wasn't him and his phone had been stolen. He was done. He lost his job, is no longer allowed to work with kids. His face was splashed all over the papers. He was no longer a threat to kids. That was my main concern. The Adelaide mother said, I was disappointed in the reaction from SA Police, who basically laughed at me, and glad that Scotland Police were so quick to respond and take action. The judge at Nick's sentencing, on the other hand, pretty much sympathised with Nick and almost felt sorry for him. Sheriff William Wood remarked to Henderson, "You are a relatively young man who has found himself in a bit of a mess." He was sentenced to 180 hours of community service and was placed on a 3-year supervision order, which effectively bans him from using the internet. She said, "This impacted my son greatly. When this first happened, my son said he would see Henderson's Instagram picture every time he closed his eyes and had trouble getting to sleep at night. He was worried that because we had gone to the police, that this man was going to come to Australia and get him. But with support and reassurances, he did get better. But he no longer rides at his local skate parks and he's hesitant about being around males." This man's agent had the gall to tell the court that his restrictions were upsetting to his client because it meant that he could no longer eat at his local McDonald's. She warns others, please don't give your children phones without linking accounts and checking who they are speaking to. A lot of games have a chat option like Roblox, Minecraft, even games like Toon Blast. Be vigilant, on the ball. Apart from the predator side of things, make sure they aren't being a bully, saying horrible things to others. You are the parent. Take control of your kids' electronics. While we're on the subject of leniency for child sex offenders, here's an update on 33-year-old South Australian man Gary John Tipping, who was convicted of sexual offences against boys aged between 8 and 15 years old. The court heard some of the offending happened shortly after he was released on a court bond and later while on parole. Tipping's sentence expired in January this year, despite prosecutors asking the court to make an indefinite detention order. Forensic psychiatrists told the Supreme Court they believed Tipping remained at high risk of reoffending, had poor insight into his crimes, and had not engaged well in treatment. An application from Attorney General Vicky Chapman to keep him behind bars was overturned by the South Australian Supreme Court. And despite legislation passed last year to block the release of pedophiles who are unwilling or unable to control their sexual instincts, Tipping was released under an extended supervision order in September this year. To no one's surprise, he was arrested again in Adelaide's western suburbs on the 12th of November, just 6 weeks after his release, for contacting a child over the internet. A spokesperson for the Attorney General said she was waiting for advice from the Parole Board and the Department of Correctional Services about the breach.
Serial child sex offender Gary John Tipping has been arrested after breaching a high-risk offenders supervision order. The 33-year-old, who preyed on boys as young as 8, is now back behind bars. He was controversially released just last month, sparking outrage from victims' rights advocates.
Supreme Court Justice Trish Kelly has yet to release a statement with the reasons for her decision to release Tipping. He has been remanded in custody and is awaiting a parole board review. And in another recent case in our so-called justice system, Jonathan Bakewell. In 1988, after spending 7 years on the run from South Australia for the charge of robbery and the assault of a woman, Jonathan Bakewell raped and murdered 20-year-old Anne-Marie Cullerton as she slept in her Darwin home. Bakewell broke down the back door of the home in the middle of the night, raped her, then strangled her repeatedly to stop her from screaming. He then left her body immersed in scalding hot water in the shower in an attempt to conceal the murder by advancing body decomposition. It was a chilling crime Bakewell later reenacted to detectives. He was sentenced in 1989 to life in prison, but was released on parole in September 2016 after serving 28 years behind bars. He was taken back into custody after breaching the conditions of his parole 4 times by using drugs, and was eventually transferred from Darwin to Adelaide in 2005 to be closer to his sick father. He became eligible for parole this year. His victim's sister, Eileen Cullerton, fought to keep Bakewell locked up by writing a 53-page submission to the South Australian Parole Board. She said she feared for the safety of women who would live near Bakewell, saying, "I am horrified that the Parole Board is releasing this drug-addicted murderer back onto the streets after 4 drug breaches." She said Bakewell took drugs the night he raped and murdered my sister, and I am petrified that he will repeat his crime. Despite this, the South Australian Parole Board deemed Bakewell not to be a risk to society. Parole Board Chairwoman Frances Nelson QC said Bakewell's drug breaches had to be balanced with other factors, including that there had been no indication he would reoffend. Ms Nelson said Bakewell, who had cancer and multiple sclerosis, would be electronically monitored. His health is so seriously compromised, he really needs to be where he has access to appropriate hospital and medical services, she said. Ms Coulton said the Parole Board's argument that Bakewell's medical conditions incapacitated him from committing similar crimes were illogical and ludicrous, adding, "I was contacted by members of the community who told me they saw him lifting wooden pallets and driving a car," she said. This is a 58-year-old man. Unless Bakewell is on his deathbed, he is dangerous. Last month, on October 18th, Bakewell was released from Yatala prison under a covert operation to protect his identity. A man who appeared to be Bakewell was ushered into a waiting car hidden under a blanket. However, it was a media decoy, a taxpayer-funded false exit to protect Bakewell's identity. Bakewell was really concealed inside a white van that followed later. Anne-Marie's sister was disgusted at the government setup, adding, "The women of South Australia have a right to see his face. They have a right to know what he looks like today."
He is as dangerous today as he was the night he raped and murdered my sister. The women of South Australia are not going to be safe sleeping in their beds at night.
This is the 4th time the board has granted Bakewell parole, and he's breached it every time. The board's heard the 58-year-old has cancer, making him a low risk of reoffending.
My sister was asleep in her bed, in her flat at night when he broke down her back door, broke in and raped and murdered her. This is every woman's worst nightmare. Women have a right to be safe asleep in their own bed.
The Corrections Department won't reveal which suburb Bakewell will live in.
Bakewell is now living in the Greater Adelaide metropolitan area. Thanks for watching, and remember to subscribe for more murder, mystery and mayhem. Until next time.